Hey y'all, it's Brianna with GoGirlMinistry, and today I just wanted to come to y'all with this word that God gave me as it was just a few hours long, but God was working in those hours, amen. So I've been, still in my faith walk with the Lord, amen, and He is so good, y'all. But I was being honest with the Lord, and I just wanted to lay everything at His feet, what I was dealing with, amen. And that's just been something I've been doing, y'all, is just going to the Lord's feet and trying not to base it off my own understanding or search within myself, amen. But God literally told me in prayer and worship the other day that He is inside of me, amen. So that was really reassuring. And so, yes, I decided to go ahead and just write a letter to the Lord, which is something I never done. But it's not like a dear God letter. It is just something more personal instead of just necessarily saying it out loud, saying it in prayer, saying it in my head. Amen. It's just another way to talk to God, I feel. And it's the first time I ever did it. I just felt led to do it. And like I said, it's not a dear God type of letter. So I'm sure you can do that as well. But I just wrote, God help, amen. So I was reading the book of Hosea, and that's where I was kind of like stuck, a little confused. And so I wrote that title, Hosea God help. And from there I marked the date. I wrote how I was feeling, my emotions as I was writing the letter, or we're writing to Him, or how I felt in that moment. And then I had 3 marks, so 3 questions or statements that I had when I wanted God to speak to me about, amen. And so I asked the question, I wrote the question down, and then God was speaking to me, y'all, right as I was writing my question or my statement. God was answering it, amen. And so I put what He was saying in quotation marks, right, under or next to what I had written. And so I did that about 3 to 4 times. I have about 3 or 4 statements on here, and yeah, God was just answering me, y'all. So I believe this is a great way to talk to God. And then I wrote some positive notes, like along the side and along the top of it, because when God answers you when you're confused, because He's not a God of confusion. So when you're confused or you're feeling overwhelmed or anything, and God comes and He answers you, or He shows you a sign, it's just the greatest feeling, y'all. Like, there is nothing else that can satisfy us the way that God satisfies us. We could hear 1,000 prophetic messages, but when we hear from the Lord Himself, it just is different. So yes, I told Him thank you at the end of it, and I told Him to prune me, make provision for me, Lord. So yes, and then so that happened around 11:04 last night, amen. And then today I started to do my little fast, just a few hour fast, and then around 2 o'clock I read my Bible, and the Lord spoke to me through His word, amen. So in Numbers chapter 13, verse 33, I just turned to Numbers. I never really read Numbers. I don't think I've spoke on Numbers. I never really read Numbers, or my Bible never turns to Numbers. But today it did. It went to Numbers chapter 13, verse 33. Well, it went to the Moses, what is it? Report of the spies, amen. And if you don't know what that whole chapter and everything is about, it's about God leading His people into the promised land, amen. So He led me to that. But what also stood out to me was the Numbers 333 at the top of the Bible. It says Numbers chapter 13, verse 33. So the 333 really stood out to me because it means to stay positive, amen. So staying positive is like being, just stay in faith. So that stood out to me. So I wrote that at the top, the 333. And so from there, God just was speaking to me, amen. And so if you haven't read Numbers chapter 13, verse 25, the report of the spies, it says, at the end of the 40 days, they returned from spying out of the land, amen. And they came to, so they is Aaron and Moses, not Aaron and Moses, Caleb and Joshua and a few other people was sent out to spy on the land that God had. Israelites were in the wilderness, and so Moses was with them, and he sent Joshua, Caleb, and a few other people to spy out the land, amen. So, and they came to Moses and Aaron and to all the congregation of the people of Israel in the wilderness of Paran at Kadesh. They brought back word to them and to all the congregation and showed them the fruit of the land. Right? So this stood out to me right here, and showed them the fruit of the land. So they were able to take some of the fruit back with them, right? As like a souvenir or as a sign from the Lord that, this is for them. So God was literally showing them in their hand what was for them. Amen. And they told him, we came to the land to which you sent, right? It flows with milk and honey, and this is its fruit. So they were able to literally hold the fruit that God promised them in their hands, y'all. So that really stood out to me. But then they said, however. So I underlined however, because it's like when you say however, it's like a but, right? So it's like, yes, we have it in our hand. We see it with our own eyes. We see what God is doing with our own eyes. But we have this, God is literally showing us the fruit in our hand, but we have an excuse, or we're trying to speak against what God is doing. So yes, the people who dwell in the land are strong and large. And besides, we saw the descendants of Anak there. So they were saying the Amalekites, the Hittites, the Jebusites, and Amorites dwell in that, right? And the Canaanites dwell in the sea and along the Jordan. So they were saying everything that God is providing for us is already occupied by all of these different armies, right? All of these different people. But Caleb quieted the people, which means he quieted the noise. So even with us, when we are being promised something from the Lord, all these voices will start to come out of nowhere. All these people will come out of nowhere and try to, down talk what God is doing in our lives, right? So we need to quiet that down. We need to quiet the noise in our mind. We need to quiet those that don't believe for us. Amen. So yes, he declared, and then he declared it. Let us go up at once and occupy it, for we are well able to overcome it. So he declared victory right then and there. He said, don't listen to the people that are doubting the Lord, but declare victory over it. Amen. So, and then if you move down to verse 32, it says, so they brought to the people of Israel a bad report. So instead of telling them about the land of milk and honey, they actually lied to the people, and said that it was not what God told them that it was. So they were lying on God at that. So be careful of who you tell your promises to, who you tell God's promises to, your plans to, because guess what? If they're not followers of Christ, walking in faith, they're not going to see what God sees. They're not going to see what you by walking in faith. Amen. So they went back and told their own people, not just random people, their own people, a lie to keep them from going to the promised land. So yeah. So in chapter 14, the people rebel. So they get frustrated with Moses, because Moses and Aaron were prophets. They were being used by the Lord to get the Israelites to the promised land, and they just were angry with them because they felt like they were lying to them, or they led them this far to die, right? So it says in verse 2, and all the people of Israel grumbled against Moses and Aaron. It says, why would God bring us this far to allow us to die? They literally are answering themselves, right? Why would he do that? Why would he bring us to the wilderness and let us die by the sword? We could have just died by the Egyptians. So it's like, why would he do that? He wouldn't do that, right? The Lord literally killed the Egyptian king and all the people that were chasing after the Israelites. That's how much he loved them, right? So why would God bring us this far in our promise, in our lives, just to take us out now, just to allow us to fail now? And I was telling myself that in my prayer closet, like, God has literally done so much. He's brought us so far. Why would he allow us to fail now that I am fully surrendered to him? He, even when I was in sin, and I read that, I believe that was in the book of Hosea. I read, even then, even when you were a harlot, even when you were living for other gods, right? I was still providing for you. The oil that you were receiving, the bread that you were receiving, I provided that for you, even then. So I know now that I am fully surrendered to the Lord, right? now that I am a child of God, right, he's not going to allow me to fail now. If he was going to allow me to fail, it would have been before, when I was living in sin. So just know that when you are serving the Lord and you are truly surrendered to him, he is going to provide. Even when it doesn't look that way, trust me, he's doing something bigger than we can imagine. And it really makes sense whenever, he does whatever he, is going to do in our lives, whatever he promises us, it makes sense in the end. We're going to look back and say, that made total sense. God, how you did it. Do you serve the kind of God that will lie? God says he's a man that shall not lie. So if he promises you something, it's gonna happen, y'all. Amen. In verse 4, it says, and they said to one another, let us choose a leader between us. They didn't even go back to God, but they asked one another, let's choose a leader and go back to Egypt, right? They didn't even consult with God. And that's something that's so important. When we start to question a situation around us, we need to go back to God and ask him to remind us of his promise to us. Amen. Not man, who was not there on the conference call when God gave us our promise, but God himself. God, please remind me of what you're doing in my life. Amen. So that's important that we do that. Lean not on your own understanding. Amen. So even when things look crazy, lean not on your own understanding, but the understanding of the Lord, of the understanding of the Spirit. Amen. So in verse 7 it says, and said to all the congregation of the people of Israel, the land which we passed through to spy out is an exceedingly good land. So this is when Aaron and Moses fell on their faces to the congregation, because they are true men of God. Amen. As well as Caleb and Joshua, the son of Nun. They were true men of God. So when they're saying that they're lying, it's like, I know what I heard, and I am a man of God, So it's like they felt shame, and they just like tore off their clothes before the congregation, and they could not hold it in anymore. And they said, the land that we passed through is an exceedingly good land. So not only is it a good land, but it's an exceedingly good land, because God will do what? Provide. Well, he will give us, what is it? Exceedingly all that we ask. He will do exceedingly more than what we ask of him. Amen. So it wasn't just a good land, but it was an exceedingly good land. Amen. But it says both of them, Joshua and Caleb, right? Delights in us. He will bring us into the land and give it to us, as he will give it to us, a land that flows with milk and honey. Amen. So that stood out to me as well, because it said, if he delights in us, and we know that God delights in his children. He loves us. That's something that we don't have to wonder, does God love us? Because he absolutely loves us. He sent his own son down. It says, God so loved the world. John 3:16, God so loved the world that he, gave his only begotten son to the world. Amen. So he absolutely loves us, and it's nothing for God to provide for us, y'all. Amen. He brought Israel out of Egypt, out of slavery. That's why when they said, why would he bring us this far, right? Because he loved y'all enough to save y'all from slavery. He's going to bring y'all into the promised land. Amen. He's going, but he started. That's the type of man that he is. He will be started, right? So Moses was reminding God, please, spare these people, because the Egyptians will hear about it, and they already know that you have been standing with them, and that you have rolled the clouds for them, right? By day you rolled the clouds, and at night you were a pillar of fire for them, right? So if you kill them, then the Egyptians will hear about it, and they will know that, or they will believe that, it's not no, but they will believe that you brought them this far to kill them, kill them in the wilderness, because you couldn't do what you promised, right? And so he was saying, for your name's sake, right? Spare them and forgive their iniquity, and, forgive their guilt and their transgression, which is not really how you should, apologize. Now that I'm thinking about it, to the Lord, you shouldn't say, well, God, for your name's sake. You should say, God, because I sincerely apologize. I sincerely feel guilty for, doubting you, right? And so not just saying for your name's sake or for your glory, but God reminded him, I have pardoned according to your word, right? So he was saying, I already excused them according to your word, Moses, right? But truly as I live, and as all the earth shall be filled with the glory of the Lord, right? So God is saying for eternity, because God lives for eternity, the earth is already filled, shall be filled with the glory of the Lord. So whether the Israelites make it to the promised land or not, my glory shall reign. Amen. My will be done here on earth. Amen. So understand that the promises God makes for us is not just for his glory, which we are created for his name's sake, but it's also because he loves us and he wants to see us established. He wants to see us in the place of milk and honey. Amen. So it's important that we're obedient to the Lord. Amen. God says, but my servant Caleb, because he has a different spirit and has followed me fully, I will bring him into the land and his descendants will possess it, right? So he's still keeping his word and he's allowing Caleb and his descendants to move forward. But the ones that doubted the Lord, he did not allow them to see it because they had become wicked. And when you turn away from God, you no longer have the protection of God. Amen. So God did not spare the ones that, spoke against God. And sometimes you have to do that. So sometimes you have to do that because when someone is, doubting your word and constantly, going against you, sometimes you just have to cut them off, right? It's just best to do that and not even give them the promise that you promised or not even allow them to see it. Amen. So yes, I love the Lord and I had to get down on my face. Not to ever brag or anything, because it's just one-on-one with me and the Lord, and I love him. Amen. And I fear the Lord. Amen. And so it's never to do that, but it's to help y'all as well. But I definitely had to get on my face when I was reading this, because there are times where I don't feel like right now I've been doubting the Lord, which is why I wrote the letter to, or I started to write to God, because I don't ever want to get to a place where I am doubting his word. Amen. And so that was just so good to receive this, y'all. He literally answered me with this chapter, with these chapters, chapter 13, chapter 14, y'all. It was exactly what I needed. I never want to doubt what God has promised me. I never want to doubt the calling that God has placed on my life. And I was very honest with him, saying that, like, God, I still trust you. No matter what goes on or what's the outcome of any situation, God, I still trust you. But I need to be honest with you, of where I am right now, so that was just amazing that God met me at that place. Amen. And so, yes, I love him. And he is so real, y'all. And he literally reveals himself constantly to us. That's why he says, I give you constant signs. It's in there. It's in chapter 14. I've given them constant signs. Or it's in, he says that in chapter 14. I give them constant signs. They've asked me for signs. I've delivered the signs to them, and they're still doubting me. Amen. Or it might be in chapter 13, but just read all of chapter 13, chapter 14 to reassure your faith, y'all. God is so good, and I'm so grateful for him. And yes, I hope this word touched y'all. If it did, make sure y'all leave a like, a comment, and subscribe, y'all. And yes, God is so good. Make sure you share your testimony. You share, even if it's just God gave me this word today about something you're reading in the Bible. It's powerful, y'all, and it's good to spread the gospel. Amen. All right, y'all. I love y'all. I'll see y'all later.